I've got the A2, the front sight, obviously. I've got an EOTech on it, not the airsoft one that's in the movie, but an actual EOTech, and and then I have a folding iron backup sight to actually co-witness with my A2 and through the EOTech. So to clarify, I have three
Yeah, so
sighting
the
systems
correct one.
on a 10.3-inch barreled rifle. I have three different capabilities to. I can shoot EOTech, I can flip up the sight and shoot standard, or I can pivot and shoot with the offsets. It's so ridiculous, and I love every part of it.
We're not friends anymore.
Wait till I'll throw a sighting laser on it just for good measure. All those attachments, and I've actively not put a flashlight on it just to spite you.
I have nothing. I have no more to say to you.
All I have to do is shoot it once inside the house, and I'll see everything.
Ian, it was really nice meeting you. Caleb, go yourself. But anyways, enough about the rifle because it makes me angry. It makes me angry knowing that there's not one but two of these in existence.
Yeah, but he gets his comeuppance for carrying a gun like that. He does literally get blown to smithereens.
Yeah.
So if there is a just God, there it is.
2021 spoiler: if you haven't seen No Time to Die yet, James Bond dies. You're welcome. I just saved you having to see that. Mark 18.
You're listening to the Art and More podcast with your hosts, Nathan and BR. Nathan is a Canadian illustrator with a couple years of military experience, and BR is a British anarchist that moved to the States. Both are passionate shooters and community builders. Together, they run the Seaburn art page. Enjoy the show.
Today, we have Commando Bond and Ian from Forgotten Weapons.
It's fun to be here.
So, 1 second.
Like a PS2 memory card. It's just like all over. One saved game.
Man, I run on a single floppy disk, some coffee, and God, I don't know. Goat?
A little bit of willpower.
Uric acid? I don't know. There
a
hasn't
surplus
been
of it, in fact.
A surplus, too much.
We had to look it up because we're like, we thought the medieval people kind of got rid of that,
I thought I got rid of it, and I woke up 2 days ago unable to walk. I woke up today and almost fell down the stairs. I'm like, oh,
wow.
No, the office is coming home.
Incredible.
Yeah. Anyways, you guys, and I guess me, as of now, I'm going to self-indulge, are working on a book. I'm just going to throw myself in there because I knew that I was part of this, the illustration work as of probably 2 minutes ago.
Yeah. We thank you for letting me bully you into doing some line art for guns that literally don't exist. I think we talked about the book a little bit on the last podcast I came on.
Yes, we did.
Where we talked about the book, but since that episode recorded, last week we dropped the cover. The cover got revealed. We have the landing page up on the HeadStamp website. So
I saw you arguing it with live. Like 50-year-old forum people about what a cult army is.
Hey, a little bit of debating is a healthy way to do it. And the fact that the fun part is Ian Fleming never really was consistent on anything. And so, half the battle of the book, especially the first half of the book, is giving visual and logical breakdowns of what these things in theory should have been or what they likely were. It drives me nuts because and you love him for it. There's paragraphs about the type of soap and the type of comb James Bond uses while visiting someone else's home, and it's there for him. But not once do we actually get a model number on the designated sidearm Beretta or the special or Colt Army Special 45 long barreled. He just has these word salads of things describing these guns. The skeleton gripped Beretta 25. And that's it. That's all you get. You get little details sprinkled in throughout 8 novels or 14 novels when the whole thing's done about those guns. And it's like just trying to figure out what the hell is he even talking about.
Fleming was really not a gun guy. And he really didn't know that much detail about guns, but he liked to write detail. And so we get a mixture of things that are plausible and things that are a little eyebrow raising.
Yeah, so it's fun to kind of acknowledge where the shortcomings are and then bridging the gaps of reality. And so that's obviously where having a guy being able to do some artwork to kind of fill in those pieces that don't exist. Like for instance, in the short story "The Living Daylights," which the movie obviously takes its name from, and that famous sniper sequence in the film where Bond's got the WA-2000 and all of this. That whole sequence is almost pulled directly from a short story page. But Bond in that short story has a non-existent Winchester experimental target rifle, blah 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 blah. And so, good luck with illustrating that. I will be I will be sending you some words and some illustrations that were done for one of his books to give you something to work from. But I mean, that's the level of it sometimes. Sometimes it's like, yeah, it could be one of these 5 guns. Otherwise, it's like, there is no gun that this could be. So we will just have to make one up.
I appreciate the Canadian HKP7 that just comes into frame every once in a while. Just, I'm glad I'm not the only person who is constantly fidgeting with guns on camera.
I mean, it's kind of my job.
It is actually your job. How did this book get started? Like, what inspired you and Caleb to collaborate on a book?
Well, so this was entirely Caleb's work. I'm here as part of HeadStamp Publishing. Caleb approached us about publishing the book after seeing, I believe, some of James Rupley's work.
Yeah. So James Rupley does all the photography for like the Vickers Guides and the HeadStamp books, obviously. And so I had it in my head for a long time that I always wanted to do some sort of James Bond book. I mean, I actually found when I was doing research for the book, like those DK kids books, the kids version of coffee table books. I had one growing up that was like a bright red hardcover, The Secret World of James Bond. And I opened it up and all these papers fell out. And they were these like awful illustrations I had done in like the 5th grade where I was trying to write a book. And there was like writings and illustrations and all these things about the world of James Bond, filling in these blanks, basically duplicating the work of DK Press. But that's beside the point. I didn't do that for this one. I should probably clarify. But to that end, I always wanted to write a book like this. And when I left the firearms industry full time a few years back, about a month later, I felt a pull in wanting to get back into that world and finding a way to be more consistent other than just doing Instagram. That's great, but that's not tangible. That's not something that exists in reality. And it's not a culmination of everything that I've done. And, limited in characters, a couple photos is fun, but I wanted something that could actually say, hey, I built something to actually add to this conversation that people that are non-interested in firearms or maybe on that cusp of firearms can pick up, be excited by, and learn something from. And to do that, there was only one group to work with, and that was obviously HeadStamp. I mean, they lead the space in high-quality coffee table style books that are just look beautiful. One stipulation was it had to be a book that my wife would let me leave out on my coffee table. Not something that's for gun guys, by gun guys, or super esoteric and impossible to come by. I wanted it to be something that could be published in mass, had a solid business engine associated with it. Because, I also work in marketing. So the last thing I wanted to do was put in a year and a half, now almost 2 years of my life into something and see nothing out of it. Like I wanted this to exist in the wild in a large capacity. So, across the board, working with James and Ian just made sense. So I called James initially. Thankfully, James, who did all the photography, was already following my Instagram. So I was able to reach out to him through Instagram and go, hey, that I'm not just some rando. At least you followed my work for a little bit. Can we schedule a call? I have a pitch. And about 15 minutes later, he and I had a call. And then not 6 days later, Ian got roped on a 3-way call. And then I signed paperwork like that February. So like February 23, we had a publishing agreement signed and I was getting to work.
It's a no-brainer for me. I think the subject matter is fantastic.
I think so too. I have learned more about James Bond, I think, since I met you than in every other year of my life cumulatively. I also kind of find it funny, as a kid, maybe this is my generation. I think a couple years older than you. Every kid drew Titanic. Every kid was a little too into Titanic, and that was yours. Like, I appreciate the fact that this is basically a cumulative lifetime of, hey, you were 5 years old and doodling James Bond guns in your book, and now you are a grown-ass adult and selling a book full of doodle James Bond guns. But it's also good.
Yeah.
I think so it's interesting to hear Caleb talk about who he's anticipating, like who this ought to go to and who will really be interested in it. Because I think there's another entire audience out there of people who are gun guys who have who've watched some or all many times of the Bond movies, but haven't ever gotten into the actual literary source material. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a really interesting aspect of this in who was Fleming? What did Fleming do? What are the real world connections between Bond and the world of espionage back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s? And like, what were the guns that the original literary Bond had? There's a ton of material there that even really hardcore gun guys, a lot of them have probably never seen and never really considered. And to me, that's almost more interesting than the cinematic stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, because you don't you know what you see, but you don't know what you don't know. And even like the most hardcore Bond fans, I think, are fascinated by the continuation novels. I was on a live stream a couple weeks back with David Zaritsky, who does like the largest James Bond YouTube channel in the world, and he admitted on air, which I thought was funny, that he had never read the John Gardner books. He had never read 15 of the largest continuation novels part of the series, and those go through some huge sidearm waves. Like, the PPK ends up not being there. The P7 shows up for a book. The ASP carries a lot of water throughout there. And so, even the people that are like just completely engrossed in that world maybe haven't touched all of those things. I read all of the novels, continuation and otherwise, in the span of like 3 months for this research. I sat down and powered through like all the Flemings, all the Gardners, all the Bensons, there's, if you include the short stories separately and everything else, I think you're close to like 60 pieces of like just that for the research side. And the amount of guns that I flagged, I mean, we could write a library worth of books of guns that are just touched by James Bond once. And so that was the other hard part, was like pairing it back to the ones that were essential, telling the really cool stories. But the crazy part is, like, to Ian's point about like the real world espionage tie over, there's so many cool things that we've uncovered with this book that I think are somewhat in common knowledge, but most people might not know. And some primary source pieces that are really cool about that, like, Ian Fleming founded his own commando unit during World War II. That's a fascinating detail that not a lot of people know.
I was about to say, wasn't Fleming involved with what eventually became modern spycraft?
Yeah, I mean, he helped. He was part of naval intelligence, and he was a secretary to the director and all that. And that's the common knowledge part. But in his role, he not only met William Donovan and crafted a memo for Donovan that ended up being the founding document of the OSS and later the CIA.
Sorry, she's
he also went ahead and went through and did stroke the cat, a little Blofeld action back there. It's good. It's really good.
She's all over the place. Blofeld's cat was actually well behaved. I think she's going to try and crawl into the computer at some point. Can you hear her bell jingling?
That once. It's great.
Okay, excellent.
That makes me happy. But yeah, that's some of the cool history stuff. And then aside from just like being a part of it and helping with the OSS, he also founded 30 Assault Unit, like a literal commando unit in World War II, the first of its kind as well, because they their job was to get ahead of the Allied forces when they were going through German lines and capture documents before the Germans could destroy them. So if the Germans knew that the Allies were coming, they destroy encoding machines, they destroy essential documents, maps, whatever. So 30AU's job was to get ahead of the line and reconnoiter, capture documents, and get essential intelligence knowledge before it was destroyed. And that was all his brainchild.
That is fascinating.
And there's some definite ties of Bond's backstory that's never really elaborated on too much, but in places you're like, oh, that's a 30 Assault Unit thing. Like, Bond is written as one of Fleming's commandos who goes into more what becomes, I guess, more modern spycraft after World War II.
Yeah, I mean, with World War II, it's like World War I, started like the baby steps of like tank warfare and aerial warfare that then culminated into the big boy versions of it in World War II. World War II is really the proving ground for spec ops and for, that's where every special forces group can really start drawing its heritage from. It's where espionage really starts drawing its heritage from. Obviously, espionage, everyone says like the second oldest profession, but like truly like what we consider modern espionage agencies and their infrastructure and how they exist today was all formulated at that time. And it's shocking as you pull back the layers how deeply involved a guy that is mostly known for writing some spy novels later in his life was in that. People kind of like throw their head back and laugh every once in a while when you bring up the Bond novels versus like, Jean Le Carre. They're like, he's the guy, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and all this. Like, that's true spy novels by a true guy in the world of the secret world, as he dubbed it. But Fleming had a lot of stuff going on there too, and I think that's really fascinating.
I was going to say, I mean, Fleming was involved with the inception of a lot of this
Yeah.
stuff.
I
would
even when he
argue
was
that
younger, like the how he got that job as a secretary was he was a really great writer and he was a really great researcher and he had a brain for it, and so like he was being sent overseas as like a journalist covering other things, and he was actually writing reports for the MOD about troop movements and sizes and quantities and all these things, even like in the early stages of the war before he took on that true role that really kind of made him infamous in that world. Um, and that's actually been included in some of the James Bond backstory as well. There was a series of books that I grew up reading that were really fun, like The Adventures of Young James Bond, which actually are pretty good.
I read those.
Yeah, like Silverfin and all those books. Charlie Higson wrote those, much better than his On His Majesty's Secret Service book, which does really well as a fire starter. But the young Bond is really really great, and he carefully crafted some great nods to Ian Fleming with that, and you see that in a lot of the novels, and I just think that's really fun. Those are those carefully tailored pieces that you might not recognize if you didn't know a man's biography, and there's just the wink of the nod, and the little flick of the nose that just fit perfectly. So a lot of stuff like that, and we try to include a lot of that in our volume as well, because it's great to have that esoteric knowledge, but I don't like gatekeeping that stuff, and I feel like there's really great ways to not just talk about the guns of Bond, but also the who, what, when, where, why. Like there's a story behind these pieces that is relevant to the current day, that's relevant to what people care about with like real history. And so, we went out and we interviewed folks from the CIA. We found primary source pieces, or folks from the DSS or the Navy SEALs or whatever the case may be, and talked to them about guns that exist in the world of Bond that they use, that frankly exist in the world of Bond because they were using them. Like sometimes it happened the other way around, sometimes it happened that way. And it's just fascinating to kind of see the balance between fiction and reality that existed during, the 20th century.
Do you have any stories you could share with us about things that you wouldn't have learned if it wasn't for the research in this book?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a cool one that's like not super like, oh yeah, it's a bombshell that I'm really excited to share in the book. Oh, you know what? Here's a cool one. Rex Applegate. He might be familiar from like the Fairburn Sykes Applegate daggers and all that. Very famous CIA guy. Yeah. So I learned a lot about the history of the Centennial Airweight, which was the gun that Jeffrey Boothroyd really wanted James Bond to carry. So Jeffrey Boothroyd writes a letter to Ian Fleming, famously bitching about the Beretta 25 being a weak man's gun. Doesn't really make sense, or it's really meant for an ugly lady's purse, is basically what he says. And so to that end, he starts prescribing new guns, and the one that he really wanted was the Centennial Airweight 38 Special from Smith & Wesson, which is great, and it's a cool gun, and that was really informed by the authors of the time, right? Like he was reading Elmer Keith, he was reading American Rifleman, and all these magazines were really touting that 5-shot lightweight gun as the new cool thing. Well, I found out in my research that the only reason that gun existed was because Rex Applegate was doing spooky stuff for the CIA post-war, when it was still like just past OSS, just turning into the CIA, right? And what he did was he was in Mexico, and he gets into a gunfight with a 38 Smith & Wesson, so not to be confused with 38 Special, little baby wheel gun. And so he almost dies, and he goes to Smith & Wesson. He's like, hey, we need a better carry size gun from you guys. It needs to be in this caliber instead. Can you make me a lightweight carry gun? And that's basically the inception of the Centennial Airweight. CIA dude almost dies in Mexico, goes back to the company, gets into the C-suite office, says, I need a better gun. And I think that's really cool because it almost ends up being Bond's gun, and it's actually written into one of the novels. So in Dr. No, when the PPK is prescribed, because of Boothroyd's insistence of an airweight, Fleming messes up. He accidentally issues him 2 carry size guns. He's really meant to be carrying a full size gun and then a compact gun. That was kind of the Fleming thing. You see that in all the continuation novels as well. But it ends up being these 2 carry size guns. But yeah, Rex Applegate's concept of what a defensive gun needed to be for himself ended up becoming a Bond gun. So there's CIA informing commercial market, informing reality, informing James Bond. So there's a fun story.
That's actually fascinating.
And it's stuff like that. Like, I think the Bond stuff's really cool. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I live in that world every day, and I think it was funny.
The real history.
Ian had to bump me back a few times when I was writing the book and they were reading it. They're like, yeah, this is great, but like more Bond. And I think it's because my brain was like, well, that's common knowledge for Bond. They're like, no, I promise it's not.
Yeah.
Like, I just kept thinking, like, well, everyone knows that. They're like, no, they really don't. But you just live with something so much, you just assume that it falls into that body of common knowledge. Like, I had to go back when I was doing the bibliography for this book and like try to find the things where I had read this when I was like 10. And that has just become like internalized knowledge, like deep core, like this is just source of truth in my head. I don't know where it came from. So like, that's been the hardest part, honestly, is like finding those pieces where I just knew that was the truth because it was the truth.
This week's episode is brought to you by Two Grunts Inc. Two Grunts Inc. is a veteran-owned and operated rifle manufacturer crafting firearms with professionals and prepared citizens in mind. All of their parts and components are developed, tested, and manufactured to perform using the most standard of mil-spec 5.56 ammunition. Purpose-built work guns is their motto, and rifles made to last is their ethos. With high-end components and materials used in all of their rifles, like their 4150 CMV nitride-treated barrels utilizing a 223 Wild chamber and a 1-in-8 twist, optimized for both M855 and M193 ammunition, achieving 1 MOA or better with most manufactured mil-spec ammos. Bolts made out of 9310 super alloy steel and carriers made from sharp-peened 8620 steel, maximized for increased toughness, wear resistance, and strength. Each and every part has been meticulously thought out, deliberately tested, and expertly manufactured and installed. Each rifle also comes standard with a 45 or 90 ambidextrous fire controls, gas buster, ambi charging handles, and many other high-end functional parts. Check out their website, twogruntsinc.com, that's TWO as in 2, and GRUNTS as in rifleman by trade, INC.com, to purchase one of their rifles, or other parts for sale. Use the code CBRN, that's Charlie Bravo Romeo November, to get $50 off your order. That's CBRN to get $50 off your order. Be sure to also check out their Instagram and YouTube at twogrunts_inc to learn more about them, their rifles, and their other products. Once again, that's code CBRN to receive $50 off your entire purchase at twogruntsinc.com. Thanks guys for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
One of the things I like about this book is that there's so much different, varied content, all relating back to the same theme. And in many ways, it's split into a literary side and a cinematic side. And the literary side is a lot of the historical tie-ins and what influenced Fleming and how Fleming influenced the world. On the cinematic side, we get what is, to me, kind of an equally interesting but totally different set of important aspects that have to be talked about. And Dr. No is a perfect example of this, where, James Bond carries a PPK, right? They talk about it a lot. There's not a single PPK in the entire film of Dr. No.
Really?
And the stand-in guns actually have additional stand-ins, right? So Bond is issued a Walther PPK verbally, is what they say. And they hand him a Walther, and it's in 7.65 millimeter. They make a very big point about that in that movie. And it's a Walther PP, which is the full-size version, in 380 auto. So it's the wrong caliber, wrong gun. And that's phase one of that. And it only gets replaced more throughout the movie.
Every time he shoots it, it's actually a different gun that you see him shooting. So the first time he suppresses it and shoots a guy in a hotel room, and it's an FN 1910. And then later he's on Dr. No's island, and he's shooting at Dr. No's dragon.
Yeah, the tank all gussied up like a dragon, right?
And the gun starts as his PP, being called a PPK, and then it turns into a high power, and then it turns into a 1911, and then it turns back into a Walther.
Yeah, so if you watch it in like Blu-ray and you go frame by frame, you see the gun turn into three different guns throughout. It's a loss to time, but the assumption that everyone had is they just didn't have a PPK. They could cycle blanks.
Yeah.
So, or a PP rather.
That tracks.
And so they just grabbed what they could, and just to prevent us from being flamed, not a hotel room, Miss Taro's home.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're totally good. But it is that location. But yeah, it's he's playing solitaire, and there's this really tight shot of it, and it's an FN 1910 with a silencer on it, and it's a super. And then just to drive yourself even further nuts, one of the coldest lines in the entire franchise is, "That's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your six." The guy has to throw his gun away because he shoots into the bed where Bond has it dummied up like himself, and he's sitting in the corner instead. So the guy throws the gun away, and then he's casually slinking it back over to himself with the bed sheet that's on the floor. He goes to grab it, lunges up. Bond doesn't move at all because he knows that it's empty. Goes click, click, and he goes, yeah, it's a Smith & Wesson. You've had your 6. Then he shoots the guy like 6 times on the ground, in the back as well. It's a 1911 with a silencer. So it's not even a Smith & Wesson.
It's not even a 6-shot gun or a Smith & Wesson.
Yeah, so like everything about that is wrong, but it's just so badass. Like the whole segment just exudes iconic Bond. But these are movies that this was the first one, and no one ever thought that they were going to be a whole franchise.
Well, and this was what, the 3rd time they attempted Bond on screen. There was a TV show attempt. There was the American Jimmy Bond.
Fleming attempted to write some TV scripts. That didn't really take off. Yeah, there was Card Sharp Jimmy Bond. There was this like black and white that was like a show done in the United States back in the 50s. And that's also why we didn't get a Casino Royale movie until 2006, because Fleming sold the rights to Casino Royale early on just to try to get it turned into some sort of screen treatment. And it ended up being this awful like 25-minute like Americanized James Bond where they literally call him Card Sharp Jimmy Bond. And
that's terrible.
It's awful.
It's really awful. But you get
terrible.
To the point where when they finally get a deal to do Dr. No on film, and it just barely happens through a whole series of, anyway, it barely ends up happening. And at this point, it's a movie based on what is at the time a popular book, but it really is the film's. Like by the time they get to the 3rd film, Goldfinger, then the whole series is really a massive cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
But when they did Dr. No, the Bond books were reasonably popular, but they were not a huge cultural phenomenon.
He wasn't a household name at the point, right? Like he was getting to that cusp. I mean, he was getting yelled at in forums or not forums, but like in editorials about how crass his books were and this and that. But it really took like From Russia with Love, the novel, being listed by JFK in Life magazine as one of his top 10 favorite books. That skyrocketed things.
Yeah.
I love how you drop these consistently incredibly interesting little tidbits.
Yeah.
This is common knowledge. Yeah. No,
John F.
okay.
Kennedy had dinner with Ian Fleming because of that. Like they had him over to the White House. He's like purportedly one of the last White House guests. I mean, the other famous JFK bit that everyone knows, or maybe knows, is like the last movie that JFK saw was a Bond movie.
Really?
Yeah, because they had a private screening before it came out of if I remember right, and I'm going to get flamed on it for being wrong, but I believe it was From Russia with Love. Because
it's kind of ironic considering he was indeed killed by the CIA. That's a joke.
They're like, here, enjoy this film, and
but by the way, this is a foreshadowing just in real life.
So what this leads to is like it's not like they produced Dr. No with the mindset of the Bond franchise today.
Yeah, they wished about it, right? Like they bought all the rights. Like Eon Productions like doubled down, and they're like, we're gonna get all the rights. We're gonna turn this into something. But this was also at a time where like one-off movies were the norm. Like James Bond is the first cinematic franchise. Full stop. Like there was not a cinematic franchise before James Bond.
And so
it's also why he had a cultural phenomenon, right? Like there was not a reoccurring character. There was not reoccurring actors. There was not a semi-cognizant like reoccurring plot line that occurred. And so they kind of just, and also like home video wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Like people weren't watching movies at home and screen one phase at a time. So good enough was more than good enough. Like they had a Walther. Check the box, brother. Let's keep rolling. Like that's all they needed.
Yeah.
We have a handgun. Fantastic. Shoot the scene.
The Walther doesn't run reliably on blanks. Crap. Well, we're already here in Jamaica. We're filming. We don't have the budget to like go home and deal with this. What are the chances? No one's going to be watching this in 50 years. Just, make it work with what we have on hand. And again, not expecting people to be paging through it frame by frame, analyzing it for technical issues. A century later.
We forget about that when we live in a world now where you can log onto your computer and pretty much watch any movie ever made frame by frame. It was a big deal. Like I have a poster in my basement that's a redux of one back in like the 60s where James Bond back on screen, because they would do double headers at movie theaters of important and popular movies to bring them back and get them back in front of people, because it was the only way to rewatch it. Like unless it was on cable and you could, or whatever, like on the 3 channels
network TV
on network television, which I highly doubt that was happening too terribly often for James Bond. But there was limited television time, so you had to go to the cinema and you had to see it there.
Caleb, you probably haven't yet, but our episode with Matt Zaranowski a couple of weeks ago and the inner workings of how guns work in movies, it's kind of interesting hearing you guys talk about it and seeing how things have changed and how it's an entire career now. And even then, things slip through. A lot of things slip through.
That episode that you'd had recorded, though, it's on my docket because of the movie gun thing. I'm actually back to enjoying content again now that the manuscript is out of my hands and we're in the layout phase of the book. So my day-to-day work on things is more project management side and light editing as the layout comes together than I log out of my day job, make another pot of coffee, and work from 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. writing a book. That is mostly done for now.
All right, so here's another good story for you, especially on the cinematic side.
Yeah.
And that's the first use of the Walther P99s
really?
in movies. Because there's this controversy among really serious Bond nerds of, is this a first generation P99? Because it's actually not. It is literally a factory prototype that's in the movie. Because Walther absolutely wanted James Bond to have the new Walther, which was the P99. But when they were filming the movie, the gun wasn't actually in production, in commercial sale yet. But they had the factory prototypes. You actually talked to the Walther guys about this directly.
So I went to Germany for the book Walther Flew Me Out There, which was the coolest thing in the world. I got 4 days with the owner of Walther Arms.
That is so.
Who is a huge.
Your
Bond
life
nerd.
is
He's a
very
massive Bond nerd. The guy is a.
You'd
huge,
have to be.
Well, and he was the fascinating part about him is his name's Wolf-Heinz Flaumer. He saved the company.
He's got a Bond villain name.
Yeah, he's got a really cool name. Mr. Flaumer literally saved Walther, and for the coolest reasons too. So, in the 1990s, Walther had been floundering for a while. They had come out with some cool guns. We're talking about the P7 right here. In the same trials that made the P7 happen, the Walther P5 occurred. But it wasn't really commercially or militarily or any way really picked up. And same happened with the innovation of the PP Super or they had a P38K for a while that was out there, the P88. There were these really cool guns, very thoughtfully designed, but they just weren't selling. So R&D costs were astronomically high, and the lenders were knocking at the door. Walther was getting to the point where they were selling blueprints, prototypes, first production guns, limited edition variants, everything but the window dressings were going out the door to keep the company financially alive. And it was getting to a point in 1993 where if the firm did not sell, there would be nothing left to sell. So Steyr actually was going to pick up Walther.
Really?
They were about to sign the dotted line, and Wolf Flaumer, who owned Umarex, which is an airgun manufacturer.
Let's back up for just a moment and point out Steyr is Austrian.
Yes.
Walther is German.
Yes, and that's where Wolf-Heinz Flaumer, a proud German man, kind of stepped in. He's like, well, hang on. I will not let a storied German company leave Germany. So they stepped in at the 11th hour, drafted paperwork, and signed an agreement in 3 days, which is an unheard of timetable, and bought the company out from under Steyr. So they became the owners of Walther. And Wolf-Heinz Flaumer was a very successful businessman and understood, I think, marketing in a way that people in the industry today truly understand. He, to me, is very much like an Ian Fleming, where Ian Fleming didn't know what product placement was. He just kind of put it in the books because he wanted it to be truthful. Flaumer understood in the European market, where private ownership of arms was kind of difficult even at that time, that telling a story was more important than selling a product. Selling a high-quality product was important because the product had to back the story you were selling, but he really leaned into licensing. So his first licensed product was a custom Sherlock Holmes airgun that came in this book set that had some Sherlock Holmes stuff. It was all stylized. It was a little 38. And he did a Miami Vice gun. So it was all stylized like Miami Vice, and it was a Beretta 92. And then he was doing, obviously, the Walther stuff. And so he knew where the market was. He understood what people wanted. He understood what media. And actually, when he came into Umarex, the company was not doing well. And he this was like the early 70s. He said, we need to sell, and this is, he like finger in my chest when he was telling me the story of Umarex was very, very important to him. This detail. We sold the story of America to Europe. He's like, I took, because they were selling like single action army and lever guns, right? Like air guns, like the Daisy style pellets and stuff like that. And so what did he do? He grabbed 1950s, 1960s, 1970s Marlboro advertising and used that as inspiration to sell air guns in Europe. He's like, these people want the spirit of America. So we will make all of our advertising the spirit of the United States. And the company was insanely successful. So I tell you all this backstory to say that when he buys a company in 93 that is financially destitute and is in dire times, what does he do? He spends 3 years developing the next innovative pistol. A pistol that, by the way, one of the lead designers of Heckler and Koch, the guy who put together stuff like whose name's on patent documents, like the P7, the P, some of the most iconic guns from Heckler and Koch. He was brought in at the late start of this project, and he was asked what he thought of it, and he was quoted saying, all of my personal finances I will put into this project to ensure its success, when discussing the P99. Because
really?
the gun to him was that next pioneering piece. The P99 is the first one to have removable back straps, which is now a standard for most firearms. P99 it was a striker fired gun that had a decocker built into it. Single action, double action trigger that was astounding. 3 different trigger groups right out of the gate. It came with a walnut backstrap that you could hand fit to the gun if you so desired. It was modular from the ground up. And so he designs it for 3 years and they get it ready for market. And he says, the modern Bond must carry the modern Walther. And so he makes it onto the Tomorrow Never Dies set and hand delivers a Walther P99 to Pierce Brosnan and talks to him the entire time. But the modern Walther must be carried by the modern Bond. And I was talking to his secretary. We jokingly call her like the real Miss Moneypenny. She's been his private secretary for almost 40 years now, I think. She was on set with him that day. And she's like, Wolf, who doesn't speak amazing English, was badgering her the entire time they were there, saying, you must tell him the modern Bond must carry the modern Walther. And she's like, Wolf, I did tell him. She's like, tell him again. And so sure enough, this movie was already in production. Okay. Like when Pierce Brosnan gets the gun on set, it's the scene where he's getting the BMW from Q. So, they like the Avis rental car, Q's wearing the jacket, it's this giant shipping crate, it drops out and it's the BMW. And that's the scene that you see Wolf Hines delivering the gun on. And so the movie's on the ground running. So what does he do? He hand delivers a prototype of the gun. And we can tell it's a prototype because the serial number starts with a V as in Vector. And that's a designation used in Germany to establish a prototype versus a commercial variant gun. Has a couple different aesthetic qualities to it. There's like a ski slope on the trigger guard that's a lot more dramatized, and a couple other little details like that only exist on the prototype gun, and later blank firing models also used that to just pay homage to that original frame. Commercial one, a little less dramatic. So to that end, Brosnan loves the guy. He thinks he's awesome. And so he reportedly schedules a new photo shoot for the promotional images for the movie and carries the P99 on the set and uses it for that. He gets it written into the movie script.
If I recall correctly, there's actually a shot of Brosnan when he gets the gun. He picks it up and says something like, the new Walther.
Yeah, which was like a spoon-fed line from Walther. He not only is it, the new Walther, it's, the new Walther. I've been asking Q to get me one of these. So it's like the best marketing that could be possibly done for a company where James Bond, like Wolf said, the modern Bond, the guy who kind of bridges the gap in aesthetics and fun of like Sean Connery and Roger Moore, where it's fun and dangerous at the same time, starts carrying. And also because the Bond movies are always focused on what's in vogue at the time. The 90s and the 80s were huge on big action films. So Brosnan's movies are bombastic action movies, right? The movie ends with Pierce Brosnan dual wielding an MP5 and a MP5K in a suppressed P99 in all black tactical regalia, shooting both of them and running through a stealth boat. It's the gun that fits that so well. And so that's just a really cool story that's like somewhat common knowledge, I think, but that I got some really cool in-depth stuff with having being spoon-fed aggressively and amazingly, not only stories but very strong proofed beer in Germany with the 82-year-old owner of Walther, who is just so cool. I mean, literally all of their license plates. I got off a plane in Germany, Nathan, and I red-eyed it there overnight. So it's like a 13, 14-hour flight. I land at 8 a.m. Germany time, and I barely sleep on this plane. I stumble out of the airport. I get through customs, and the guy's kind of waiting at the door for me. I see him in a Walther polo. I'm like, well, I didn't need you to get out of the car because the damn car has a custom license plate that says CW Carl Walther ULM Ulm 007. Every single one of their cars has a custom bespoke 007 license plate.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
See, this is where it's, I think one of the great things here is as a combination of Bond nerdism and gun nerdism, there's a fantastic overlap here because Caleb will say something like, well, all this P99 stuff is basically common knowledge. And I'm like, I don't know any of this. And I guarantee you 95% of people who have watched Bond films don't know any of this. And getting this material into the book, I think it's a big part of what makes it such a cool book is
I
for
agree.
The Bond nerds, we've got the technical details on the P99, on all the guns. And for the gun nerds, we've got the really cool, all the backstory on the Bond films and how the Bond films use these guns that perhaps the gun nerds really know about. And then for everybody else and both groups, we've got the historical tie-ins of how does the character relate to real history. There's so much cool stuff in the book.
I love that. And I love the fact that the owner is so passionate about Bond and storytelling and everything else. I think there's a certain point where the kind of corporate cynicism and the and that doesn't seem present here.
No, dude, I got a private tour of the Walther Museum in Ulm at the Walther headquarters. They opened the door. There's a 30-foot banner of Pierce Brosnan with the 007 logo. As you open the door, it's the first thing you see. And triggered on the door as well, when you turn on the lights, the James Bond theme song is playing on perpetual loop. So you walk in and you just get hit with the theme song. You get hit with this giant banner of Pierce Brosnan with the light directly on his face. Like, it's incredible.
Weirdly, the Berretta Museum does not appear to have something similar about the 418.
Yeah, shockingly, there's no shrine to Ian Fleming floating about in the Berretta archive. But maybe with this book, they did help a lot too. Berretta Italy was able to do some really cool stuff with us on this book as well.
Really?
Yeah, and that's I think something that I'm really passionate about with this book is my background. I did a lot of marketing in the firearms space. I worked at a range retailer, and I got to have a lot of touch points with a lot of the brands, and I helped them do marketing. I actually did a lot of stuff for them. So like we did co-op and collaborative pieces and all sorts of stuff. And for me, and the reason why I liked doing that job so much is because I really wanted to normalize these brands and get them in front of people. And so for me, this is just as much about telling the Bond story and telling the gun stories, telling these brand stories and getting people excited about them the way I am. Because these are good people who deeply care about what they're doing. And like you said, cynicism is so deep, and it's so easy to find that. But I think there's so much positivity to also locate, find, and celebrate here that
I think so.
I'm very, very happy to kind of go, yeah, my friends at Berretta, and not just like flippantly throw that word out there like it means nothing. Like, these are people that I would genuinely and have broken bread with or share a drink with or whatever the case may be, because they're good people that deeply care, that went the extra mile to make this happen. I mean, the Germany trip too, was an 11th hour thing. It came together in a span of like a month and a half. And what shocked me the most about it, and what humbled me the most, to be perfectly honest, was I had put together what I thought was the craziest wish list of items ever, like a 30-page document that, and I sent it along when I first pitched this to Walther USA, and they pitched it up the chain to Walther Germany. I wasn't expecting to go to Germany. I was just asking for archival pieces. Like, hey, it would be really cool if we could have some like patent drawings, maybe, or some manual pieces, or some stuff that isn't in the wild anymore, right? That's one of the cool things about these HeadStamp books is like, oh, well, it'd be really cool to see a WA2000 from 5,000 angles, but what about the original technical drawings of stuff like that came with the gun? Well, that's something that's really cool too, right? And so pieces like that don't exist anywhere except these archives mostly. And so I just put out a wish list for that. Well, I get to Germany and I'm handed a hard drive that has everything that I had asked for. I pulled out, I printed hard copies of this wish list that I had put together, and I hand them out when I get there, and they hand me back a version of it that they had already printed out, and they had made it as a checklist. There was translations of it in German. There's a folder this thick at the Walther headquarters titled Caleb Daniels, The Guns of James Bond, where they have everything they did for me, all the email correspondence. I saw half my website printed out on there because they had read it and translated it to German to pitch it up the chain and to see what was going on.
There's something so German about that.
It's just so efficient, and also
efficient.
It terrified me because I called my friend who's the VP of marketing over here at Walther USA. I'm like, dude, is this like a massive trip and undertaking that could have been an email? Like, did you guys do all this work and then they send me out here and they're like, well, what is he going to do now? I'm sitting there sweating bullets taking photos, and not just because there's no air conditioning, because I was like, I really, really hope that I get some value out of this for them, because obviously for me, it's just a trip of a lifetime. And we definitely did. We definitely got some stuff for them that...
I mean, you went over there and they handed you the Walther 2000 from the movie.
They handed me the screen used WA2000 that the owner of Walther bought at auction himself. He went to the auction, he bought it, he took it home, and it is hanging in his personal office within an eye line of his desk.
I remember waking up at, I think, 3 or 4 a.m. from a series of messages from you. And the first one that I see is just this gun, the WA2000, and a description of everything. And it woke me up. I got excited.
Well, it was funny because they kind of, it took like, I was there for 4 days, and I told the guys there, I'm like, what do you need? What do you need? I'm like, coffee is all I need. And, they bring me like a cup of coffee, and I have a cup of coffee with dinner instead of a beer. And they're like, are you sure? I'm like, yes, please. Like, I'm in a different time zone. I've had like 3 hours of sleep. I'm staying in a different hotel each night because all these places are like 5 hours apart. Just keep loading me on the caffeine. And so we get to the last day. I have like a half day in the owner's personal office, which is a museum in and of itself. And they finally figured a full pot of coffee gets set in front of me, a coffee cup, and then the keys to all of the gun cases. And they're like, we have to go take a couple meetings. Would you mind just doing your thing here and get whatever you need out? You can cut the tags off of it. Just take a picture of them together so we know what goes with what. Have fun. I'm sitting there with the screen used WA2000 having my morning coffee. Just staring down and like, is this reality?
Have fun with this. We'll be back.
Yeah, I'm sure you wouldn't mind, right? I'm like, yeah, I'll be good.
This is best possible outcome.
Yeah. And it was a total goober because I had limited time, and one of the guys came back and I thought he was just going to explode with laughter because I literally had the shirt off my back because I needed to do a flat lay that was Sean Connery inspired, and I was wearing the correct Turnbull and Asser, like a Turnbull and Asser blue shirt, not the correct whatever, but it's the right brand, and having the label there was going to be a really big deal for me with the correct Dr. No Gun, the correct suit. So I have just my undershirt on. I have my shirt laid out with my tie, with my jacket, and all these guns on the floor, and I'm taking photos, and he walks in, and I'm just like half undressed in the middle of the owner's office going, hey there.
It's not what it looks like. Maybe it is what it looks like.
And so that was a good laugh for me, to be sure.
That's incredible. I do not know how you get yourself in these situations, but your life is...
I do not know either. I just know that they keep happening, and I am insanely grateful. And I know that the gravy train dies. At least I have these memories. I am forever blessed that these things have occurred. I've been far too indulged for a nerd. That's what I keep telling people.
Well, I feel like this industry is made up of a lot of that.
It really
gun
is.
nerds and people who are passionate. I don't think you get into the firearms industry necessarily for the money, because there's not a ton of it.
I mean, maybe you get into it that way, but most people figure out fairly quickly that it doesn't last. Like,
Yeah,
that doesn't work that way. Stay in it because you're passionate about it.
Yeah. I mean, I
think
left
so.
full time, and not 30 seconds later, I was undertaking what HeadStamp has told me on numerous occasions is the most complex and stressful and diverse project they have ever put together.
So what do we look? I think we're recording this while we're still doing the layout of the book.
Yeah.
And it's looking like it's going to be probably about 500 pages at this point.
Holy crap.
It is big enough that briefly, early in the process, we considered splitting it into 2 volumes and doing an entire volume on cinematic and a whole volume on literary.
And to entirely clarify, the only reason why we didn't have to do that was because I cut 30,000 words from my initial draft of the first half of the book. I was cresting where the book currently rests in terms of word count before I was at 50% of the content required to be covered. And they were like, our usual books are like almost 20,000 words less than what you right now have. How are we fitting this into a volume? So I had to go back and put a ton of content on the editing room floor just to fit the rest of the book. And we still have pretty rich, and we're going to be bursting at the seams with this.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the cool part. And I didn't like delete anything, obviously. It's been warehoused for potential use elsewhere or otherwise, or whatever the case may be. But that was really cool. I mean, I'd rather have surplus of information than less.
Yes. And to be fair, the editing process is one where you more efficiently present information.
That's exactly right.
And you can slim things down without actually losing anything.
Yes.
In fact, making the final product better by making it shorter.
Yes. And
yeah, it's a massive book. It's going to be as big as anything else we've ever published, and it's all on James Bond.
Yeah. So it's going to be I mean, it was a crazy project to not only like undertake, but also just like on the management side. So yeah, like just all the things, like trying to figure out like dealing with the hoops and doing it correctly and being safe, and also presenting information in a relevant and exciting way. Because if you can't tell from me just rambling, I can not only be long-winded, but I can be long-winded about the most tiny detail. So getting it to a point where, yeah, we got it the first time is kind of an important thing. So
I don't think anyone watches any of our content not expecting that. Realistically, if you don't, go into a 2-hour YouTube video about what makes the 7mm French Lebel. I just made that up. Maybe that's real. Or listening to an Art and War episode without expecting long-winded talking about either nothing or something very, very interesting. I think this is more the latter.
Well, I appreciate you using the word interesting instead of randomly esoteric or something to that effect. I'll take interesting as a superlative.
I mean, why not both?
Yeah.
So one of the really fun things we did during the photo shooting for this is, we're doing a photo shoot at a big private collection that has a lot of Bond adjacent guns, because most people, guns of James Bond, okay, it's a book about the PPK. Well, there's so much more than that. And to make it effective, we want to do as much of the photography as possible in as few locations as possible. So we've got all of these Bond-related guns, and Caleb has packed in all sorts of Bond-related ephemera. A lot of it on the clothing side, which is as detail-oriented as the gun side. So Caleb will pull out a shirt and a tie and a belt and be like, yes, this is precisely this is the setup that Connery had in Goldfinger, or Roger Moore had this in Moonraker. And we pair that with
that is
a couple
so
of
strangely accurate.
Yeah, we pair that with a couple of props from that period or that movie, and the gun from that period or that film or that book. And we did a bunch of sort of still life type photography, which is something that's kind of novel for me. From the HeadStamp side of the business. Like normally it's just about the guns. And if we're doing non-gun things, it's it's a cartridge, or it's maybe a sling or a mount, or a gun accessory. And in this case, it really was still life photography meant to provide the whole overall feeling of the era and the character.
Right.
And looking at how those pictures in particular add to the manuscript is awesome, because they really help you get this feel of, oh, this is the 50s. Oh, this is the 80s. This is the 2000s. And that was a really fun part of the project.
I had a ton of fun with that because like what I did was basically like my Instagram layouts on extreme steroids with the best photo equipment on God's green earth. So it was like working with a masterclass in photography. Ian and I are holding bounce cards while James is helping me stage the shot a little better than what I might just do on my own, and pulling it all together, learning how to do that stuff better as well, and then getting final products that, yeah, like you might not know that Roger Moore wore that tie or that shirt or whatever. But when you see it while I'm talking about Roger Moore, you feel that part of the era. Like the aesthetic draws you into that story the way I want it to. Because the on whites are gorgeous, the detail shots are gorgeous, but how do you retain the Bond fan? Well, you tell the story that they're familiar with, but you also give them things that tie back to what makes Bond Bond. I mean, James Bond isn't an action hero just because he runs around with a gun. He's an incredible action hero that's somewhat unrealistic because he's doing it in bespoke tailoring while driving a $1 million Aston Martin at this point. And Roger Moore had a formula of bedding 3 women throughout an entire film and drinking X number of martinis, and there's all this stuff that encompasses that. And so we wanted to include all that. I mean, one of my friends, a definite huge shout out to Lorenzo, he's got an Instagram account called Omega Bond Watches. He has every screen accurate Omega wristwatch from the entire Craig era. Or Craig and Brosnan. So across the board, every Omega you see from Goldeneye forward is in his collection. So we captured all of those for the book. I had another friend who has all the Bond Seikos, because if you didn't know, Bond wore Seikos during the Roger Moore era because the quartz movement era was a huge deal. And so he has like the TV watch at one point. There's a scene in, I think it was Octopussy, where he's like zooming in on a woman's chest and watching it on his watch in Q's lab and going, yes, this is working wonderfully. Thank you very much. So, just a little Roger Moore tongue in cheek, but like stuff like that appears all over the place. And it's just as important to James Bond, just as James Bond can't be James Bond without the suit. He can't be James Bond without the gun. He can't be James Bond without the right holster. It's everything together makes the character what we care about. And I didn't want to present a book about this subject without sharing all of those facets.
Right. It really rounds out the subject material. It's the sort of thing you look at it on the face of it and you're like, well, I'm not interested in James Bond shirts. I want to know about James Bond's guns. But the reality is having that whole full character there is part of what gives the gun its place in the story.
Yeah. I mean, the gun exists as Bond's gun because of the mythos of the character surrounding it. And you can't have one without the other.
It's an entire look. It's
And when it comes to the literary, when it comes to the literary Bond, I think the gun is often a really important tool in helping you understand who is this character.
Yeah.
Because the literary Bond is very much a different, well, first of all, each of the actors who plays Bond on camera plays a different character. Mm-hmm. They're all Bond, but they're all a different person.
Yeah.
And the literary Bonds are the same way. They're different people, and you don't have the benefit of being able to see them in your mind's eye, because you can't just go watch a literary Bond. You have to take what's written on the page and interpret it through your own imagination. Mm-hmm. And I think understanding the guns that the literary Bond carries goes a long way in helping you understand who this character is. And that's one of those things that a lot of the gun nuts, I say that in the most friendly possible way, being one myself, the gun guys who are going to see this book, I think there's going to be there's a tremendous amount of new material for them to understand about the literary Bond.
Yeah, I mean, anytime I post like the 25 Berretta, a lot of people just start flaming it very quickly, laughing at it as the concept. But like what they don't understand is, the James Bond novels, and the reason why I love that they're typically set in the time that they're written, unless they're, going back, like the Horowitz books are phenomenal. They go back in time, but that's a whole other tangent to get on. But Ian Fleming's books, when you pick them up, they are primary source fiction. You read Casino Royale, you see the world in 1953 through his eyes, through Fleming's eyes, truly, and then through, by proxy, his character. But the politics of the world are interwoven. The geopolitical conversations, the car, I mean, everything is built around that. And the gun is a deeply important part of that story.
Right. The guns are like, what was the hotness when that book was written. Because just like what were all the other popular, fashionable, trendy things going on? That's what Bond had, and the gun's no different. And it's easy for us today to not understand how on earth could a 25 Beretta make sense as a carry pistol, or why are there large frame revolvers in James Bond?
Right.
Like, what? How does this make sense? Well, it makes sense in the context of the period where that often was the new hotness. No different than the new hotness that we have today.
Yeah, don't forget, the guys that might be laughing at the 25 Beretta might have been really excited when folding Glocks were a thing. So,
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Glazer safety slugs.
yes.
When Glazer safety slugs were the hotness, James Bond was carrying Glazer safety slugs.
It's hilarious. Like, you read the John Gardner books, and there are paragraphs of copy when he starts carrying the Glazer safety slugs. He carries it with the asp. And you're reading the book, and it's like, Bond fired the asp at the man's head, and it dissolved into pink mist. Like, the mythology of how effective a shot shell 9mm round was, because some dude shot it into a paper bag and confirmed that it did in fact explode into small pieces. Because all that was done before ballistics gel testing was a thing, and so this round was touted as this incredible, frangible, devastating round. So like, Bond's cutting people in half with a 9mm round in these novels. Because the 9mm round, by the own marketing material from Glazer, he's literally duplicating the marketing copy almost verbatim.
I had to look it up. It's
fascinating. Yeah, it's a polymer tipped 9mm round that's filled with shot shell. The purported reason for it was for like sky marshals, right? It was like the whole idea was they could shoot without putting a hole in the plane or over penetrating and hitting another passenger, and it turned into this whole mythological. Like,
it's one step below Teflon coated black talons.
Yeah. It's the round that you can shoot a man, cut him in half, but not over penetrate with. Like, all of these contradictory statements.
Would you say it has a delivery like a brick through a plate glass window?
Yeah, provided that it doesn't actually puncture the window all the way, right? Like, that's the crazy part about it. And so, it was the same as the ASP. The ASP 9mm was the hotness when he found it. It was the gun. It was cutting edge. It was bleeding edge. And sure enough, John Gardner duplicated their marketing copy. Whether it was true or not, it was, the power of a 44 Magnum in your 9mm was an actual advertisement that was ran of an ASP 9mm with Glazer safety slugs. Like, it was a combination ad, and it was touting because of, it was power at the time. They were talking about velocity. So because it was such a damn light round, because it was shot shell 9mm, guess what? It was about as fast as a 44 with all the power behind it cartridge wise, right? So they're like, yeah, the power of 44 in your 9mm. Like, all these like half truths and like quasi statements informed these writers. And
and so they make a good insight into what was the general understanding, what was the mentality, what were people talking about and doing, and what were people fantasizing about in each period through this whole literary legacy, and frankly cinematic too.
Yeah, the cinematic stuff has does a great job of kind of doing that as well. At one point, Bond, they call it a PPK in the movie, but he's actually carrying the P5 in Octopussy, and that's the same year that Never Say Never Again comes out. That year was big for Walther, because that's when the P5 really started becoming a thing. And both Bonds, the official Eon movie with Roger Moore and the unofficial movie starring Sean Connery, carried the P5 instead of the PPK in that movie, which is just kind of
know that.
Fascinating. Like, it's dueling movies out in the same year. Octopussy puts it in the ground because it was the Eon movie, and they happen to both be carrying the brand new Walther. It's just cool little stuff like that I think people hopefully will appreciate after reading the history of these guns in combination with the pop culture part of the history. Because, I think everyone today who is of like the Gen Z alpha side of things, and probably the later millennials as well, got into a lot of guns because of their use in video games. So a lot of people learned about guns through the cinema long before that. And James Bond was my gateway drug into a lot of these firearms. I grew up around guns, don't get me wrong, but I quickly became fascinated with self-defense handguns because well, James Bond just stopped nuclear warfare with one, right? It's so impossible to be like, well, if he can do it, why wouldn't I try? So it's like the gun you want to start becoming interested in. And so I became, even working in the industry, I had access to great pricing on pretty much any firearm that I wanted. And the only ones I was buying were ones that were related to James Bond. I was buying the esoteric thing because it's cool to have the Glock, but I've got one in the rental fleet. If I want to shoot a Glock, I'll shoot a Glock. I will collect the PPK. I will collect,
P99.
P99s. I was checking arms list every night looking for one because they're so bloody expensive, and found one 12 minutes after it posted and drove to a gas station and picked it up the next day. So it's everything. It's so fun.
I love that. I love that. And I just love Kentucky. That's where you did that, right?
Oh, no, Missouri.
Remember when we started?
Kansas
Missouri.
City.
I'm still bad at states.
It's okay.
You'd figure I've been here for a hot minute. I would
you couldn't
have a better grasp
make
on
me
American
name a single
geography.
place in Canada that's real, so
Canada isn't real. It's a lie that the media tells you. So in drawing some of the stuff for this, like for example the camera gun and the weird cut down AR-180 AR-18 variant that you sent me yesterday, I had a question about some of the non-existent guns that are in James Bond. Can you fill us in a little?
Yeah, there's a lot of really crazy stuff because Bond is the connection, especially the cinematic Bond of like fiction and reality, and then once you get into the Q branch era, things kind of get really zany. So probably one of my favorite pieces is, other than like the Golden Gun, right? Like you did some awesome line art for that, like, and that's going to be so cool to see on the page. In addition to like the actual, we have one of the replica pieces that a friend of mine who runs the largest James Bond website in the world, James Bond Lifestyle. His name is Remmert. He is an amazing guy. He is a massive James Bond fan. Obviously, he runs that website. He had some great photos that he had taken of like the actual prop replicas that are so cool. There's some really cool stuff in there that's going to be put together between him and yourself. But one of my favorites and one of my favorite stories associated with those guns is the Moonraker laser gun. So there's this crazy looking laser blaster that appears in the movie Moonraker that clearly looks like it's built off of an Uzi. And that's because they basically doctored up, and I could be getting this wrong offhand. It's either they doctored the toy Uzi up or they used the same molds as the toy Uzi and then added more to it. And they created this gun, and it clearly has like an Uzi grip module and all these things. And as I mentioned to you before, we're using an Uzi grip as a microphone stand at the moment. And it's because a great friend of mine, who I think you're familiar with, actually I know for a fact you're familiar with, it's Da Fizzles on Instagram.
Oh yeah, the 3D printing fellow. He's really cool.
Well, he and I grew up at the same gun shop, and he's a very good friend.
Really?
And he, from the ground up, and he wrote a great section in the book, so I don't want to get it wrong on how he did it, but he basically did a scan of the measurements of an Uzi and added a little bit of space to it to make it look like the toy would be done, and 3D printed and painted a beautiful replica of this gun from the ground up, completely designed it himself based on stills and everything else. So we would have a physical version of it to work from, which is so cool. It's amazing. And if you know the guy, and if you're following on Instagram, which you totally should, if you're into cool 3D printed guns, I mean, he literally designed the first successful 3D printed RPG, which is so fun.
That is awesome.
He's
an interesting fella.
He's a fun guy. He's my little Q branch guy right now. He and I have been talking about it, and with the grip module that we're using right here, especially if this is going out during the pre-sale, expect to see some really cool content of me with maybe a functioning 9mm Moonraker laser gun.
Would that be a body kit for an Uzi, or would it be...
Basically, yeah. I mean, it would be like a reskin of an Uzi, because that's what it is. That's all it is. And maybe you throw in like one of those somewhat quasi frowned upon Chinese lasers in the laser sight system and catch some things on fire with that. Because, in the movie, it's a laser gun, but the way they show it working is like this laser pulsing and then like melting a plastic dummy face, which in theory, could be replicated with something like that.
It's actually more realistic than how laser guns are usually shown.
Yeah. Or
the
you know,
Star
you
Wars.
do some 9mm streak ammo in the dark, and you create a laser effect while shooting 9mm from the hip using the laser as a sighting system. So all I'm saying is, and I'm putting him on record that he's going to help me do this. I fully expect to be hip firing an incredible 9mm Moonraker gun, maybe with or without. I might have to get with you on costuming, Nathan, on like the Moonraker James Bond spacesuit, where he has like got like a Union Jack and a 007, and he's in this ridiculous like get up. If you look up Moonraker Space Blaster, you'll see like a poster of Roger Moore in like this like silver white spacesuit with that across his chest, like the way you would hold the PPK, and that beautiful gun in 9mm.
Well, if it comes up in the show, it is legally fact and also binding contract. So
I'll take you up on that, and I'm all about bullying him into doing things for me, and he's indulged me on far too many occasions already. Just an all-around awesome guy, really good friend. And that's honestly my favorite part about like doing this stuff is like I'm not important, but the people that I know are really, really cool. And if I can talk about them for half a second and give them the validity that they just well deserve and kind of put them out there, fantastic.
Yeah. He's a really talented dude.
Yeah.
I think that, and Caleb, you don't give yourself enough credit. You are probably one of the most interesting people I know. And I feel it's kind of a privilege of working on the show to be able to say that.
It means a lot, man.
Yeah.
I said it before. I'm a dork having way too much fun and giving a lot of leeway.
That's the best part
I don't know. Guys like this going, yeah, sure, man. Why not?
Do it. Do more of that.
Because, you know, like, and not to paint myself into a corner here, but I've told him already, I'm like, you know, it's really great that you're suffering through all this with me once. How does another 6 times sound? Because I have a running list of other things like this I'd love to do.
Are you allowed to talk about him? Well, I mean, that's.
I haven't pitched anything formally yet, so I won't say it yet, but some of it would be somewhat relevant to what I'm kind of doing now. Some of it would be completely off topic, but in a vein of other things I'm passionate about. But, you know, I really like writing. I grew up,
you're good.
I think, in like the best era of youth storytelling that ever happened. You know, I grew up with like, obviously everyone read like Harry Potter, but I also grew up with authors like Rick Riordan and, you know, Charlie Higson. And then you had television series like Batman the Animated Series, where it was being written by Paul Dini. And it was an amazing Emmy award-winning children's television because the plots were so intricate and thoughtful. You know, you grow up and you read guys like that, and you read books like, you know, the Ranger's Apprentice series is another one that I grew up loving. Grew up with all this like amazing storytelling, and you just want to be a part of that. Like, you want to be able to put things out there in the world that have that much impact on somebody else because you've been impacted by that kind of writing. And then, you know, growing up and then suddenly having books like, you know, Jack Carr's amazing series out there to continue reading after crushing all the Bond novels. It's just so cool to kind of see stuff like that in the wild, and even be an 1/8% of something like that with a book like this is going to be so fun.
Yeah, cementing yourself as part of this world, which I love. My mind jumps to, and I was talking with BR about this other day. Again, BR, you suck for having a girlfriend and having to do important things, and, you know, being a responsible adult. You should be here with me. Cut that out, please.
No.
I love you. You came up the other day when we got the Vesper Martinis with you, and you were entirely done up in a Roger Moore herringbone suit.
Oh yeah. Well, I was in that. It was Houndstooth. Yeah, it was my black and white Houndstooth, which is the literary Bond. That's the literary James Bond that was hanging out at the Vesper Lounge. But Roger Moore was there. He was behind our heads with Sean Connery as well. That's why I like the Vesper bar. It's good fun.
I've actually been there since. It was great.
Yeah, and Vespers are dangerous, but they're fun.
But that was the first time BR has. Oh God.
Did you see the Justin Timberlake mugshot the other day?
No.
He famously, it was like all over social media, TMZ, and all the nonsense. He got pulled over for drunk driving. He got a DUI, and he insisted that he only had one drink. And the bartender confirmed that, and they confirmed that he was drinking a Vesper.
Oh, that's not one drink.
Yeah, no, it's 4.5 shots of liquor.
Yeah, I was going to say, I made the mistake of having 2 of those. Was that with you or the next day?
You had 2 more the next evening. I made the tactical error, and I was telling him this before. I kind of planned all of my my personal business drinks at the Vesper bar before having dinner.
That is a problem.
I think I had 4 Vespers before eating, and I had not had lunch because I was working the SHOT Show floor. So I was
How are you?
purely coffee and 4 Vespers deep. And at that same place, there's this great little place called I think it's called Pizza Bar or something like that, or Hidden Pizza. It's like this little tiny hallway on the second floor of that casino. You kind of go down and it opens. Secret Pizza is what it's called, literally. And you open up and it's this great like New York style kind of pizzeria. Great pizza. And I definitely made friends with the pizza that night because I was dying otherwise. But yeah, it was a good evening. Just probably should have thought about the food better.
4 Vesper martinis. I had 2 and I was non-functional. Genuinely non-functional.
I grew up watching James Bond movies from the age of 10, and that man never showed drunkenness, and he drank like a sailor. So, it's all about holding yourself together. I joke my liver was being trained at the same time my brain was being told about how cool PPKs were. My liver was like, this is what you need to be prepared for someday.
Really embodying that James Bond.
Top to bottom, brother. You got to have all the fun. You can't just do the one thing. The guns are cool, but the liquor is interesting. The suits are great. The clothing in general. I mean, I'm wearing the Sunspell Riviera Polo right now from Casino Royale, and my shoes are the Sperry's from No Time to Die.
He's always wearing James Bond things.
That's kind of
always
my parlor trick, whether I mean to or not. I could probably empty my pockets, every article of clothing, and my backpack or whatever, and whether it's Bond or not, there is a pop culture nod or tie to every single piece.
Yeah. Going to have a Omega with a garrote built into it fairly soon.
I've got the guy. I just told you that story. So I've got a guy that'll do that. So we'll see if we can make
Wait, actually?
No, I mean, I've got DeFizzles. I've got a boy who's got a feeling of doing those types of things.
You don't have your own bespoke watchmaker?
You don't have
what? Really?
I got 2 guys that love making watches, and I would love to pitch having a non-functioning watch that had a wire built into it,
What if it was a functioning watch that had a wire built into it?
That would be solid, too.
That would definitely be better.
That would be better, yeah. I've been blessed because I do enjoy doing like the sartorial side of things with a lot of my content, connecting with some great guys that do some really cool watches. Like right now I'm wearing, because I'm traveling, my Magnum PI homage watch. It's done up like his Pepsi Rolex. GMTs are great for travel because I can adjust the time zone and read my home time zone and where I currently am without actually adjusting the watch. I just adjust the bezel. And that's done by our Watch Co. My other ones are done by another company called Forster Watch Co. Those are crazy dudes and great guys also. And, it's fun knowing all these little like boutique-y guys that are really passionate about what they do and want to make fun stuff. So we have a lot of fun like
nerds, that. I think is the good word.
Yeah.
I say that with love. I'm very much one.
Yeah. I mean, you've been listening to me ramble for over an hour at this point. So if that word is not the only one you're using to describe me, there are probably other words that are not as kind.
Yeah.
Far less charitable, but equally as honest.
Did he just write down never bring this man on the podcast again?
Is that what I saw? A failure bringing me back for round 2. You let me ramble once, and you let me ramble again.
You, my brother in Christ, you are my third co-host. You're here to stay.
Well, I hear I'm on here more consistently now than BR, so
yeah,
twice is equally as dangerous.
But a question for both of you, but specifically Ian, what do you look for when you do new HeadStamp book entries?
We look for interesting subject material, good research, and either good photography already done, or more usually a subject that we can practically photograph ourselves. So if someone wants to write a book about some gun subject and they're like, yeah, there's 100 guns in the book and they are no single institution owns more than 2 of them, so we have to go to 50 different places to photograph the book. Like, that's not probably going to be a viable project for us. And that was actually one of our challenges with the Bond book was, man, there's such a huge variety of guns, and there aren't that many people that collect all the guns like tangentially associated with James Bond. So we were able to do this in part through more filming trips than we will normally try to do for a book, plus getting photography from a bunch of really cool partners, largely through Caleb's contacts here. But
Caleb,
beyond that,
know everyone.
He does. He really does. We want to see top-notch research and information on an interesting subject to us. And it doesn't have to be, we don't necessarily look for a subject that we think is going to be hugely popular. We look for a subject that's worthwhile to write about. So we've done some pretty obscure gun topics, and that's just fine with us. Like we want to preserve and curate all the relevant history, the best stuff out there.
I love that. I'm sorry, BR. Again, you have a mess to edit, and that's my fault.
If he was here, he wouldn't.
But yeah. If he was here, he would lead this whole thing. You know, he's aggressively British and actually good at co-hosting. No, that was mean. It sounded like you're bad at co-hosting. That was
it's just like, you have a British co-host, and I've been on here twice to talk about James Bond, and it's only been with the Canadian. I don't really know what that says about him and his passion for the culture. I don't think he's forgiven me for the fact that I have a 1953 Queen Elizabeth coronation coffee mug. Like, it's actually from the coronation, and I unironically use it for coffee still. I don't know if that
you would hate that.
Yeah, well,
wow. I treasonous rebel.
I can hear him listening to this and seething right now.
Yeah. So and he can't cut that out, because that's actually something. I got that mug too because that's the year that the first Bond novel was written, was 1953. So up until Queen Elizabeth passed, James Bond was exclusively on Her Majesty's Secret Service. So 53 was the coronation year. That's also why, fun fact, he chose the title Casino Royale when he wrote the book, was because the coronation was really important at the time. And so anything that had to do with royalty was doing well. So Casino Royale as a title kind of drew folks in.
That makes sense. I never would have thought of that.
I read that somewhere, and whether it's true or not, it makes sense to me, and Fleming was very good at stuff like that, so it tracks for me entirely. It's one of those Occam's razor moments where you read something in a primary source or secondary source, and you're like, yeah, logically that tracks, so I'll bite.
BR, I'm so sorry. The idea of him getting very angry about the idea of British royalty is very funny to me.
Yeah, in a piece of British royalty history, I bought it from a guy who had an antique mall that was exclusively British history, and a lot of it British royalty history, and my wife loved the place, and that's what I walked away with. I almost walked away with a Union Jack that was flown during World War II.
That's incredible.
It was a little pricey, so I didn't get to buy it, but it would have been really cool to hang up as a banner.
Where was this antique mall? Was it while you were traveling, or was this?
No, it's in Kansas City. There's this really cool area in Kansas City called the West Bottoms, and it's like this old industrial area back where they used to do like a lot of industrial production. It backs up to where the train tracks are and stuff, but that industry doesn't really exist anymore. So there's all these huge industrial buildings that are they open up the first weekend of every month as giant antique malls. So there are these 4-story antique malls, like the streets get closed, food trucks come in, live music happens. And so it's just really cool. You just walk about, you walk through all these places. I showed up at one point and this guy had rented a booth, and he had exclusively World War II memorabilia, like top to bottom. Another guy had classic car stuff. It's really, really cool. So we'll go there occasionally, though. Sometimes you forget it's the first weekend of the month and you have to wait another 30 days. So, it's a catch-22, but we never did find that guy. I meant to keep a postcard because he was going to close down that section of the shop that he had and actually open his own store. And I was hell-bent on finding his store and going there. Not even just to piss BR off, but just to buy more British goods for fun. And I can't find him anymore. It's very sad.
This is kind of a question for both of you, and it's unrelated. This wasn't something that popped in my head before 30 seconds ago. Something I really like doing is, especially in small towns, and now I live in rural Idaho, it's a lot easier. Just showing up at old pawn, thrift, and garage sales, seeing what weird guns, weird watches, weird memorabilia show up.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, it's going to be nothing, but occasionally you can find some really interesting, an old, submariner, a Navy SEAL wore it in Vietnam or something, and it just ended up in a fishing box.
Yeah.
If you can tell me where to find these garage sales with Navy SEAL issued Rolexes, I would appreciate
That'd be great.
That'd be, yes. You can just
Weirdly,
put
the
it
last
in
one
the
that I can
sidebar
remember-
in the chat here, and that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Antigonish, Nova Scotia is where the last one that I know. Unfortunately, I was not the person to find it, but he bought the entire fishing box for $600, my old friend Martin. And I believe that Submariner lives in a safe at the bank now. But
So that's a shame. That Submariner ought to live on his wrist.
Yeah. Not to
Yes.
quote Watches of Espionage too aggressively, but use your damn tools.
Yeah.
yes. No, I absolutely agree. But these sort of things do happen. I imagine they're not super common, but I generally end up, I have an Omega Constellation that I found the exact same way. It ended up at a thrift shop in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and was selling for, I think, $15. The age of the internet has probably killed most of the ability for you to find deals like that. But
yeah, that's why the small town ones make the most sense, because a lot of those folks don't have like an eBay storefront stood up. They're not bothered with that kind of thing. They're just collecting whatever antiquities are there. I found in my college town, I would hit the stores occasionally, and clearly an older gentleman had passed that was my exact clothing size, which I wear like a 36 to 38 regular jacket. And most of the time you go to a thrift store or antique store, and unless it was made in the 40s, most men, I say charitably, that are passing away are not that size in America. So I could wear it as a blanket if I buy a jacket. But I managed to get a vintage, beautiful Brooks Brothers jacket that didn't need a single bit of tailoring for $12.
I love that.
And it was like 50s, 60s based on the label. Beautiful tweed, but like not like overstated. It's like a nice like hacking jacket style, very Roger Moore, Sean Connery. I still wear the crap out of it. It's a fantastic jacket, and yeah, $12.
I think we talked about this last time you were on the show. Just the secondary suit market on eBay, wonderful.
Yep. I ask all of my friends that are like somewhat interested in like growing their sartorial wardrobe. Like I ask them to give me their shirt size and their jacket and trouser size, because I will personally, because I want people, if they want that stuff, I want to get them the right pieces. I'll set up like eBay alerts with their size and my preferred brands. And if something crops up, because again, I'm on the smaller side of a lot of these sizes, and so my market's pretty niche. A lot of people aren't. Makes it a lot easier for me to find those pieces, and I have a lot of fun finding like a super cool, like my friend Eli. I helped him find a really cool pair of vintage, like 80s Banana Republic safari trousers. So like they have like the double clasp to them and stuff, like the built-in belt. Super cool. He wanted a pair for this upcoming. Here's something to shill for that no one can even go to. So it just makes fun talking about it. Doing a range event with Walther in August, which
really,
yeah. Well, I guess it'll be after this airs probably, but or before, yeah. But yeah, it's we're doing a range event at Griffin and Howe, which is like one of the like most premier stunning gun clubs in the world. We're doing a range event. Walther is sponsoring it. It's over a James Bond like gala weekend that my friend David's putting on. And that morning we're hosting an event with Walther and we're hosting an event with Cabot. And it'll be at this range. Like 50 people are going to be there. We sold out in like 3 days for the whole event. It's awesome. Thanks to Walther's sponsorship, we got it down to like $60 a person to shoot Walther's, to go to this venue, to have lunch. It's going to be amazing. And yeah, so it's this really cool like vintage old school style gun club, Glen pad carpets, dark wood, everything. And so yeah, we're dressing for the occasion. And so the safari trousers should be there, and you should be able to see some photos of he and I having all sorts of fun on the range doing that.
Chances are, if we put this up in September, this will have already happened.
Yeah, it'll already happen. So you'll be able to see the photos if we're already live, which will be great. But yeah, that's the I'm really looking forward to it, and that's something that also kind of came out of this book and stuff, is being able to do cool events like that and get. At the end of the day, the reason why I wanted to write the book was to get more Bond guns into people's hands and getting them more comfortable with them. So to get this non-traditional market, like the true James Bond fans that might not be shooters or the ones that are shooters, a hands-on experience with Walther, super cool. And then of course to get my friends over at Alchemy and Cabot, who Griffin and Howe are a dealer for them, they did this awesome event a couple weeks back, I guess a couple months back once this airs, with Cabot, and it was phenomenal. to kind of bring all those things together into one location is just kind of that wish casting that you always want to talk about, but never happens, but somehow did happen. I don't know how.
Yeah.
I don't know why people were willing to do it, and I'm so grateful that they were, because I hope when this airs, people are talking about how much fun they had at this event a month prior.
Yeah. I remember you went to SHOT Show under Alchemy, didn't you?
Yeah, I travel every year with them. The last couple of years I have, because they're doing awesome. They need an extra set of hands, and Eli stepped up and he recommended me. They were gonna maybe just hire someone on site. The SHOT Show kind of offers that. They've got folks that kind of just fill in blanks as needed. And he's like, no. He's like, I've got a guy. He actually won't be going to SHOT Show otherwise, because he doesn't work in the industry anymore. But you give him a link and give him the product to learn about, and he'll do it. And so the first year, the reason why they needed somebody the first year was because they import these beautiful knives from Italy, from a place called Sandrine, and the folks from Italy couldn't make it down, so they needed someone to fill in the knife part of the booth. I ended up working the whole booth holistically, because I talked about the knives, talked about the guns. I grew up on the gun floor, so I love doing that stuff anyway. It's kind of nice to do it like one weekend out of the year, or week out of the year, instead of doing it every day. So yeah, and we had so much fun last year that I'm kind of just on the perpetual having fun with Cabot and Alchemy, kind of part of the travel team thing now. I'm very grateful to them. I get to go out there, I get to see all my friends, and I get to shill about some really cool hand-built guns in the process.
Yeah. I think they came up, I'm saying last week now because this is when it was recorded, but this is probably going to come out a month and a half afterwards. The guns made out of meteorites.
Yeah.
My friend, who I'd really like you to meet, Aaron Lovelace, he runs a motorcycle shop out of California.
Cool.
And he got his hands on a $21,000 hunk of meteorite and proceeded to make a black powder 44 revolver out of it.
Very cool.
But I think Alchemy and Cabot, whichever of the sister companies built the meteorite.
Yeah, Cabot really put themselves on the map with the meteorite gun, and the ones that they're most proud of now, aside from the meteorite ones and all the cool Oaks one-of-a-kind guns that they've done. If you haven't seen them, I strongly encourage you looking them up, because they're just so cool. They did a matched set of D-Day pistols out of Damascus steel, and their D-Day guns are made not only from the literal sands of Normandy, Utah Beach. They collected artifacts from the beaches of Normandy and from private collectors, and took that steel and turned it into Damascus. And not only did they turn it into Damascus, which is like cool in and of itself, the artist and the artisan who did the Damascus steel, if you look at the gun and the slide and the grips and the frame, there's all these little like words and symbols, like the airborne division symboling, some gave all gave some. That is literally folded into the metal. Those letters are they're not etched or engraved. That is the pattern of the steel is the letter. The amount of like craftsmanship that goes into that is insane. And so they made these tribute pistols. One of them will stay with Cabot forever, and the other one is being sold with all proceeds going to veterans charities.
I appreciate that a lot.
They're just really good people, and that's talking to Rob Biankin, the owner of Cabot, who's just an awesome guy. Also, another expat from Canada, actually. Very, very proud to be an American now.
I'm so sorry.
He's been here for a while now, but he's so proud to be an American citizen these days, and he's just the best. And he told me that this is the project that to me was the most intimidating, stressful, and important that we will ever do, because literally they took pieces of people's family members' helmets. The gold bead front sight on this gun is literally made from 30-06 brass that was recovered from the beach of Normandy. Like every single part of it was thoughtfully done. So that's just me shilling for probably the coolest custom handgun company ever. The best people that I know in the industry that are just doing the craziest things and just treat me like family. So big fans.
There's a very big irony of talking about the bespoke 1911s that come out of Cabot, and I'm holding this $30 Raven Arms 25.
Nobody's perfect.
No, nobody's perfect. Oh gosh, I hate this thing. I hate this thing so much. But it was $50.
Now get yourself a little Beretta. It'd be much happier.
I think I'm going to get that little Beretta that I'm absolutely not going to shill on the air, because then everyone else will buy one and will artificially put the prices up, and I'm selfish.
You might still be on the
secret is
search by the time this airs, and it'll be devastating with the book coming out and that. That'll be a 1-2 lethal combo you'll never recover from financially.
Well, here's hoping I will have found it in the next 2 months before this episode airs. If not, I guess I'm going to...
I'll start pushing you links. I'm really good at bullying people into getting Bond guns.
I appreciate that. That, and I might give you my suit sizes.
Yeah, you do that. I'll get you some good pieces.
Anyways, I have some questions for Ian, actually. Now that we've kind of shilled the book about as much as we can reasonably do before I start getting hate mail.
We can't give away all the cool stuff in it.
Yeah. No, that's for you to pre-order on the Kickstarter, which is probably live as of now, assuming this is September of 2025 and I haven't been either assassinated or hit by a car.
I hope it's 24 because it's like in the next month.
2024. God damn.
I'd like to have a fat stack of books on my desk that I have, we're mailing out and things a year from the book being launched. Another printing because we're just selling them hand over fist. That would be really cool. I'd love to make them do more work for me.
I was going to say, no, I'm not the kind of Asian that is good with numbers. Actually, quite the opposite. I learned how to play piano, and that's basically it.
You're the artist version, so you're the one that just disappoints?
Oh, dude, no, that's just... I got started when I was 6-year-old, drawing pictures of the Titanic in my school textbooks.
Incredible.
I did not inherit the Bondism. Well, that came later.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. No, you kind of pipelined me into it, and I've been watching old Roger Moore and Pierce Brosnan. You're very much right about how each Bond movie and each Bond actor sort of embodies the trends of the time.
Yeah.
Pierce Brosnan being, this is the 90s. We have to have action movies. You're going to drive down a hill in a tank now.
And don't forget, like GoldenEye, like half of the movie is like about dial-up internet. And the plot is they're like hacking computer servers using phone lines and things like and that was cutting edge. Like From Russia with Love has James Bond answering a pager in his suit jacket, going to his car phone in 1960. I'm going to get flamed for 63 and From Russia with Love. And that was cutting edge at the time. It's a huge deal. He had a mobile phone in his car and he had a pager. Those were not really a thing at the time. That was like bleeding edge technology.
I wonder how people are going to look back on, Casino Royale and No Time to Die or anything like that. No Time to Die still makes me angry.
I think you fall into a camp with a lot of folks on that. But, I think what makes a lot of the Bond movies really good is because they're so focused in accurately portraying the time in which they're made.
Yeah.
You always want to revisit them because they transport you to that time and to that mood and to that feeling in the same way the books do. Like you get taken in that little time machine, and you get to enjoy that world and all of its fictional glory the way that it's being portrayed.
I'm still I'm thinking about it, and I think you're absolutely correct. I'm still mad about that Mark 18 with the 2 sets of backup sights.
I've got a build now. Someone gratefully mailed me, my friends Moving Some Action on Instagram, mailed me a set of backup sights because I could not bring myself to buy them to put them on my Mark 18 build. So I've got the offset irons on my Clone Correct CAC rail, which definitely saw military service because it came from a SERP guy that I trust. And the bottom part of the quad rail is in immaculate shape, and the top of it's beaten to hell. So it was probably being, ran with a grenade launcher and then put back together after the fact. And so I've got those guys resting. I've got the A2, the front sight, obviously. I've got an EOTech on it, not the airsoft one that's in the movie, but an actual EOTech, and then I have a folding iron backup sight to actually co-witness with my A2 and through the EOTech. So to clarify, I have 3 sighting systems
correct one.
On a 10.3 inch barreled rifle. I have 3 different capabilities I can shoot EOTech, I can flip up the sight and shoot standard, or I can pivot and shoot with the offsets. It's so ridiculous, and I love every part of it.
We're not friends anymore.
Wait till I'll throw a sighting laser on it just for good measure. All those attachments, and I've actively not put a flashlight on it just to spite you.
I I have nothing. I have no more to say to you.
All I have to do is shoot it once inside the house, and I'll see everything.
Ian, it was really nice meeting you. Caleb, go fuck yourself.
Congratulations, you get to host another Schizocast.
Oh God. But anyways, enough about the rifle because it makes me angry. It makes me angry knowing that there's not one but two of these in existence.
Yeah.
In fairness, I'm pretty sure in the movie he didn't have the regular coat in his backup sight. He just forgoed that.
Yeah, he didn't have that. He got rid of that sight. That wasn't needed. So he just has the two sight systems. His A2 is just kind of hanging out on its own, kind of useless, being shot through by the EOTech. So, you know. But he gets his comeuppance for carrying a gun like that. He does literally get blown to smithereens.
Yeah.
So, if there is a just God, there it is.
2021 spoiler. If you haven't seen No Time to Die yet, James Bond dies. You're welcome. I just saved you having to see that, Mark 18. But my mind jumps to Matt Sarnowski, the fella that I mentioned that we did an episode with, who's been working in Hollywood with firearms for years, and sort of the creative decisions that lead to things like that happening. And generally, it's the pushing by directors and creative teams that don't really know guns, which is a majority of people. And the pleading of the on-set armorers to be like, no, please don't do this. Please don't do this.
How very Fleming.
It's kind of a back and forth. Yeah. I've been thinking about that since you mentioned the FN 1908 being used in place of a PPK and all of the machinations that would have gone in. It
was just like, good enough, we'll make it work.
Yeah. Not to shill my own show on my own show, but his episode's really interesting. He was armor for Civil War, Walking Dead, and a bunch of other other fun things. Yeah. And I visited them down in ISS down in Atlanta, where they actually have all of the weapons that are rented out to studios. And it's just cool to see the machinations of how everything works. And, everyone who works there is a gun guy. They're all really into this, and they're into it because they're passionate about it. And it's a constant back and forth and a push-pull with studios and creative leads to get their way, essentially. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we have shilled the book again. I keep on coming back to it because it's fun.
Yeah.
Ian, this is kind of out of left field, but I feel like I'd be doing a disservice not asking. What drew you into the world of rare and antique firearms? How did you get started with all of this?
I got interested in guns because they're mechanically interesting. The history's interesting. My father was a gun collector when I was growing up. And I just kind of like the esoteric in all of the subjects that I get interested in. So I spent some time working as a bartender and weirdly found myself drawn to weird esoteric cocktail ingredients and vintage cocktails from the pre-Prohibition era. I got interested in scuba diving, and now I'm out there looking around like, oh, what was that weird regulator sort of thing they used back in the 50s when Cousteau invented the stuff? And so guns are no different. Like the standard guns get less interesting, and I like finding the oddball esoteric stuff. There's usually a good story behind them, and whether it's a story that makes absolutely no sense at all, like that guy was totally on crack when he did that, or if it's something that was unique to a time period, it made sense at that situation because of some factor, or if it's the gun that was in fact the right answer and has become very common. Like all of those stories are interesting to me, but the esoteric ones are the best.
I see why you two are friends. This makes a lot of sense. How do you go about finding and showcasing some of the weapons you get? I've been watching your content for a while. Interestingly, who turned me on to your content? I enjoyed it for quite a while beforehand. But the biggest fan of you that I've ever met was my old roommate back many years ago, who was absolutely not interested in firearms at all. But he could watch 8 videos of yours describing minute differences in 8 different Lee Enfield variants. And both of us would just be sitting there with bowls of popcorn, just eating all of it up.
I have done that series, yes. I've been doing this almost 15 years now, and I've built up a lot of connections. I initially had a couple of private collectors that I worked with who were friends of mine who had neat, weird stuff in their own collections. And it just builds upon itself. So the more oddball stuff I do, as long as I'm able to do the history on it well and present it accurately, that will draw in other, new people into the audience who will see a presentation on one weird gun that, they knew about, but they didn't think anyone else knew about. And if they see me present it well, they'll say, oh, well, I really liked how you did that thing. I've got this cool stuff. You should come and take a look at that. My quite genuine interest in quite weird esoteric guns has opened up a lot of doors with collectors who are into that sort of thing. There's very much a phenomenon of, if you get to be too advanced of a collector, you can no longer really have any sort of enjoyable conversation with normal gun collectors, because the level of detail you've gotten to is simply something that most normal gun people don't even know exists. And so I think it's often a breath of fresh air for some of those collectors to find someone like me who has enough background to understand the context of their very specific, very esoteric collection, and someone who actually is genuinely interested in it. And I've made a number of relationships like that where people are happy, they like nothing more than sharing what they have. And the challenge for them has become finding someone who's interested to share it with. And I think I present a good option for a lot of those collectors. That's the big thing. I also work with a lot of museums, and it's similar there, although not most of the time. The people who run museums, they have their hands full running the museum and don't have a ton of time to really get deeply into the specific firearms in their own collections. But often they can see, like, oh yes, you have a reputation of doing this sort of thing accurately and factually and well. So why don't you come in and cover some of our guns, and we can get the museum some publicity and some coverage, as well as presenting the weird stuff that we have, which is in fact our museum's mission in the first place, is to preserve this and share it with people.
I feel like you have enough of a technical background, and you're able to talk to people in a way that makes kind of complex mechanical concepts actually digestible. I've always appreciated that about your content.
Yeah.
Ian, how did the name Gun Jesus come about? How do you feel about it? I gotta know.
So I think it actually came out in multiple places, basically independently and kind of around the same time frame. The one that I am very specifically aware of comes from the Washington State forensics examiners. So for a long time,
that was not the answer I was expecting.
I'm not surprised. For a long time, I was a technical advisor to the association, AFTE, the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners. They're like the ballistics experts who compare bullet striations and cartridge cases and all sorts of other sort of physical evidence stuff. Very CSI sort of group. And I never managed to do a whole lot for them because they don't really get into issues with weird old guns very often. Although it did come up a couple times, and it was really cool to have, to be able to actually assist on something. The slight sidetrack. The one that I'm particularly proud of is I had a cop call me or email me. It's like, yeah, we had this Nambu pistol stolen and we recovered it.
What?
Oh, yeah. And I can't legally return it to the guy unless we fire it and put a cartridge case in our forensics database. Because that's the law, is every gun that comes into evidence, they have to, ballistically fingerprint. And I can't shoot it because I can't find any ammo for it. Do you know where I can get some 8mm Nambu so that I can return this guy's gun to him? And this was before it was sort of quasi-commercially available like it is now. And I was able to say, I actually have a box of it sitting on my desk right now. What's your address? I'll send you a couple of rounds. So that was cool. I was able to help someone get their Nambu back. At any rate,
that is incredible.
I was a speaker at an AFTE conference in, I can't even remember how long ago, early 2010s. And I did a couple of talks, are actually both up on YouTube, very old, very bad videos. But one of this was related back to me. One of the organizers was asking one of the other organizers, they're like, we have this new person who's giving presentations, Ian McCullough. Who is this guy? Like, what's the deal? Who is this? And the the other person who did know me said, "Oh, he's got the YouTube channel. He's got the hair, like Gun Jesus." And I think it probably came about independently elsewhere around the same time, but it has absolutely stuck. And you don't get to choose your internet nickname. It could have been something so much worse. I will happily.
It could have been so much worse.
Yeah, nothing wrong with a little blasphemy every once in a while. A little safer than.
I do get the occasional angry comment from someone who clearly takes it a little too seriously and thinks that I take it a little too seriously. But
it's the internet. I think if you aren't getting any hate on the internet, you haven't been on the internet long enough.
You've been completely shadow banned and no one actually sees anything that you do anymore.
You actually just miming against a wall.
Yeah, you have no profile picture, 0 followers, and you live in a cave. But speaking of, how do you think the internet and social media has shaped the way you present and share your knowledge about firearms?
It's
kind of a loaded question. I apologize.
God, my goal would be that social media doesn't influence it at all.
That's a good answer.
There is a significant trend towards very short form content that I do my best to avoid. I really think what I do is best presented in relatively long form, although frankly, 8 to 12 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes is not really all that long form by some standards. But I think that's a good bite-sized, attention span filling format. The internet has absolutely been transformational. It's 25 years ago, maybe. If you wanted to do what I do, you would have to essentially get yourself a television show on the History Channel or maybe Discovery Channel. And they did that. Like, it was Tales of the Gun, and it was pretty cool, but it was, a handful of episodes per season per year, and it's all very strictly gate kept by large media companies, and you have to present the case why your show is going to appeal to a greater number of people than anything else that they could put in that time slot. And so, the sort of passionate amateur content that we get from the internet didn't exist in a television-based format. What the internet provided us was no gatekeepers. If you want to do it, and specifically in this sort of format, it was YouTube that provided this. If you want to do it, just do it and post it. And if it's successful, it'll grow. And if you suck and it's not very good, no one will see it. No one will watch it twice, and it won't grow. But it's all on you. You're not at the mercy of any oversight board or corporate committee. And I think that's fantastic. It's led to a tremendous amount of garbage on the internet, and it's also led to a tremendous amount of incredibly fantastic material covering the entire breadth of human knowledge and experience. That's why we can go on the internet and I can look up the history of anything really and get so much more information than anyone could have 20 or 30 years ago.
It's basically the sum of all human knowledge at our fingertips. And
yeah.
You're absolutely right. With the unfettered access to everything, there's so much crap, so much. But I'm so glad that everything is there for you to be able to sort and police yourself. I'd rather that than the alternative, which is exactly what you were saying. Just gate-kept, money-driven, media-operated. And I grew up on all that stuff. Future Weapons on the Discovery Channel.
So kind of like the internet, some of that was good and some of it was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
The good side of it was if you were one of the people who got through the gates and you got the opportunity, you tended to get a big ass budget to do it.
Yeah.
Like compared to what your typical YouTube channel is going to be working on for a budget, a television show is like, I look at TV show budgets and the advertising revenue that they get, and it's like, I could produce the show and then also like buy a bathtub full of gold coins to roll around in. So the opportunities that came to the people who did have the access were phenomenal, but it was such a tiny, tiny group of people. And again, a lot of those shows turned out not so great.
Yeah. But this is kind of a cynical thing to say, but I do think that the level of content that the average person looks for isn't necessarily what you put out or what someone who'd be very interested in the subject would put out. There's sort of a formula, I think, for something that appeals to as many people and takes as little brain power as possible to produce.
There definitely is. Like there's a huge market for kind of content you don't have to think about much. But the great thing about the internet is my potential audience is essentially the entire human population. And it
Yes.
doesn't take a very large percentage of that to make an online show totally viable. And so I can produce content that is technical and to most people totally boring as dirt and irrelevant. And there's still going to be more than enough people who find it interesting to make it viable for me to continue to do it. That's the
Of
wonder of the
course.
internet.
And I love that. As much as I complain about it, I'm just being cynical for the sake of conversation. I actually love it. My job wouldn't exist without the internet. I don't think any of us would be where we are. This question kind of goes to both of you, and we're going to wrap up here before your wife kills you or possibly me. Can you share a story? And again, this goes to both of you, about a favorite, particularly rare or unusual firearm you've come across in your career? I know, Caleb, this would have been with redacted, not going to dox your old company, and Ian, it's you've been basically everywhere.
I've got a cool one that I actually kind of just did that built out of a series of cool opportunities. I haven't filmed it. It's a gun that I just basically finished putting together, and it is a clone of the FRF1 sniper rifles that were used by French GIGN in the late 70s, like very early in the group's existence. And they had taken the standard French Army sniper rifle, which is the FRF1, and the guys in charge of the unit, the one guy who founded the unit, a guy named Christian Proutot, really didn't like the scope on the Army rifle and didn't like the mount either. And he really wasn't wrong. The scope, it's the APX L806 optic. Was made by Proutot. It is basically a vaguely tiny, sort of updated version of the German ZF4 scope from World War II. Very simple, fixed power scope. Remarkably effective, but still very simple and crude. And Proutot with GIGN didn't think it was sufficient, and he didn't think the mount was stable enough. And so what he did was went out and sourced a bunch of, at the time, very modern optics to replace it. So scopes from companies like Leupold, like Zeiss in this case. And I have a couple of photos of Proutot himself at the training range with one of these FRF1 rifles with their own model of scope mount and a 2.5 to 10 power Zeiss, late 70s Zeiss optic on it. And a number of years ago, through some connections, some friends in France, I had the opportunity to actually sit down and interview Proutot. He's the guy who founded GIGN. He was integral in development of their revolvers, the MR73 revolvers that have such a storied history now, and developed, like GIGN was one of the top tier legendary special forces units, and very, very French. Like they did things because they thought it was the best way to do it, not because necessarily it was what all the other cool tactical operators were doing at the time. And it was absolutely fascinating to talk to Proutot. Wonderful gentleman, very sharp. He's getting up there in years, but very, very sharp guy. And to talk to him about, like, why did you found a tier 1 like special operations unit and issue them 357 Magnum revolvers? Like, the semi-automatic pistol's been around for 80 years at that point. Why? And his answer was, it was really interesting. And I won't spoil it. I'll make people go watch my interview with Proutot about it. But
is it out already?
Yeah, it's been out for a couple of years.
Oh,
Prouteau, Proutot.
I know what I'm doing after this. In
the wake of talking to him, I got all the details from him about the rifles that they use. These rifles were put together in the wake of a really famous operation they did on the Somali-Djibouti border, where a bunch of terrorists had taken a busload of French school children hostage. And GIGN deployed, and they had, if I remember it correctly now, they had Proutot and 4 shooters with FRF1s. And they made after lying in the desert, watching and waiting for the right moment for the entire day, they made a simultaneous shot and hit, I think, all 4 guys in the bus at the same time. And then the French Foreign Legion had deployed as backup for them. and the Legion had a couple of armored cars that had all been idling all day long and all overheated in the desert. And so they make this tiny group of GI Gen snipers make a shot and then charge the bus with their revolvers. It's just a mind-blowing story. There's a movie about it that's garbage, unfortunately. But in the wake of talking to Pruteau, I got all the details on like what was the mindset with the revolvers, with the rifles. And he gave me a couple of these photos of like him with some of these rifles training after this event. And I have been able to actually assemble all the components to build my own clone of one of these GI Gen rifles. And right now that's a very, very cool rifle to me.
That is actually amazing. How do you even find the components to that? I mean, obviously you're Ian McCollum, of course you can.
I found the rifle in France, and it took me about 2 years to have the rifle rebuilt and then exported over here from France. A bunch of FRF2s came over in the last couple of years, but FRF1s are still very, very rare in the US. I found the scope mounts, the specialty scope mounts on essentially French gun eBay. And then the last thing I had to find was the scope, and I ended up finding the scope on Gunbroker bolted to, not to be uncharitable about it, but bolted to some boomer's Weatherby hunting rifle. And, you know, I need a late 70s vintage Zeiss. They're hard to find. And so I just bought the whole rifle, took the scope off, and then like just consigned the rifle itself to my local gun shop to get rid of.
That's actually amazing. That is. Do you have the original FRF one? You said it was a Zeiss, so that would have been the replacement optic.
Yeah, I have the original scopes as well.
It's really funny how that works. My mind jumps to I think my second gun ever was inspired by you slightly. It was a Lee Enfield Mark IV that someone had horrifically butchered by welding an awful weaver rail to the side of it, and I didn't know any better.
Oof. Okay.
God, I'm going to out myself for the teenager I was. I then tried to clean the rust off of it with oven cleaner.
Oh.
And I absolutely ruined it. You were the last person in the world I ever wanted to tell this story to. I don't know why I just did.
And there you just went and did it.
I just went and did it. Destroyed the bluing. That gun turned to absolute garbage. Anyways, fellas, I really appreciate you guys coming on and me getting to pick your brains about...
No, it was a lot of fun talking to you again, man.
Absolutely.
Well, likewise. Sorry again that my brain kind of pooped its way out of my brain pan earlier. I was up very early working on what I hope is usable art for this book. If you're listening to this, my stuff will be in here. I'm going to show myself. Buy it. Or don't, you know.
It's
you don't,
really cool
I
art.
don't like you.
Caleb and I and James are all really excited to have it in there. It's going to allow us to fill in some spaces on some guns that just often physically don't exist, or there's only one and we don't have it.
Yeah.
So they're going to be a great addition. That Kickstarter for the book is live now over on Kickstarter, and we're super excited about it. So check it out and pick yourself up a copy of the book.
And to push the Kickstarter side of Licensed Troubleshooter just a little bit too, there will be, and there are, some exciting things that you can only pick up during the pre-sale.
Yep. So
if you're thinking about the book, now's the opportunity to kind of get those little extra items and have a lot more fun with it. So, you know, obviously I'm not going to reveal what those are while we're recording a couple months previously, but go check out the Kickstarter link. I'm sure we can throw it everywhere on Godscreener for you to find. I promise if you go to my Instagram or my website by this time this is airing, it will be up in the sky like the bat signal, and you will be flooded with opportunities to spend money with me. So don't you worry, please. Give it at least check it out.
That would be at Commando Bond, all one word, I believe.
Yep.
And
the
you
book
have a
again
website?
is Licensed Troubleshooter: The Guns of James Bond.
Licensed Troubleshooter. That's a fun, legally distinct way of putting it.
My favorite quote from one of my favorite movies. So,
is that an actual quote from? Oh gosh,
Thunderball. Sean Connery's asked on his way out to his Aston Martin DB5 what he does for work, and he says, "Oh, I travel, a sort of licensed troubleshooter." And if you can't pick it up from like all the little miscellaneous things that we've talked about that I like dabbling in and doing, that's a term that I've loosely kind of adopted to talk about just as a catch-all for what I like to do. And it was a perfect one for this book as well. Like you said, legally distinct way, and just a fun little Bond nod.
Of course. The link to the Kickstarter will be in the description of this if BR does his job, which he's better at doing than I am. So, but yeah, look up Commando Bond. HeadStamp Publishing is the publisher. I'm going to let you guys show yourselves in retrospect. If you guys want to tell me where we can find your work, Ian, I'm sure everyone knows, but if you wouldn't mind sharing for those people who have not.
Sure. You can find me on YouTube at Forgotten Weapons or ForgottenWeapons.com. I have a Patreon associated with that that's linked in the description text if you're so inclined. We have an online video streaming app called History of Weapons and War at weaponsandwar.tv. And of course, all of my work with HeadStamp Publishing is at HeadStampPublishing.com.
And Caleb, I don't believe we got your website.
Yeah, it's super easy. Just commandobond.com. So you'll find me there.
Easy.
Find me at Commando Bond on Instagram and YouTube as well. And then you'll also find, obviously, the book at HeadStamp, and in the next 30 days or so, the Kickstarter link. So excited to see how that performs.
And last thing, I promise, before we wrap up, from both of you, Caleb, you've done this before, so you know the drill. Dad advice for our listeners.
Sure. I think if there's anything that I can say out of like all I've talked about here as a yeah, you're really throwing Ian for a loop. You know, I think I kind of said something to this effect last time, but I'll say it again. My favorite line that Sean Connery ever said when talking about doing the James Bond movies and becoming so iconic with what he did was he never had to work so hard in his life to make everything look so easy. And I think that is a great piece of advice for just quietly doing the right thing and building up the right processes and learning and, sitting in the back room and learning from the right people and doing things the authentically correct way. People will hopefully connect with you, and hopefully you can do the things you want to do because of that. But yeah, at the end of the day, a finished product looks really polished because of hours of work and hundreds of people that were a part of it. So a lot of humility in that statement as well, which I quite like.
Anything worth doing will take years to grow and build and do right.
Look at that.
I agree with that.
Two-parter. That's perfect.
Yeah, they fed into each other. I appreciate that. Anyways, guys, thank you again. Hopefully we'll do this again. Caleb, you'll be on soon. You're being voluntold because you're replacing VR now.
Easy enough.
He's fired.
All right. See you next time.
Okay, bye.